All right, Chanakya, are you there?
Yes, Bosh.
Yeah, Chanakya, are we good to start now?
Yes, I think we have a good amount of attendance already. We have about 44 attendees. I think we should begin. Yeah,
All right, perfect. I will commence then. Thank you.
perfect. Over to you, Bosh.
Thank you. All right, guys, thank you very much for coming in today to discuss about the information protection in modern workplace. My name is Subhash Sharma, the speaker for the day, who will be talking about the security features that Microsoft has to offer in the cloud-based environment. So starting about the information protection in Microsoft is a very granular thing that one has to understand when it comes to adopting the modern workplace. The modern workplace is the new normal to the industry that one has to adopt to understand what feature Microsoft has to offer through their enterprise mobility security plan along with Azure in production. Well, let's start off with introduction to the Azure Information Protection. Azure Information Protection is a web-based application that allows you to classify, identify, and protect your data through the labels. Back in the old days, if we all remember, when we used to use the Gmail account, we had this environment where we label our emails, we tag them, but we did not ever thought of, we will be implementing such information protection rights into our environment to ensure that our data is protected. Here with Azure Information Protection, the basic goal is to identify the severity of the data rather than implementing the policy to begin with. We, as an IT analyst or strategist, needs to understand what critical data we have in place to ensure that our identity is always secured, be it in the data in motion or the data at rest. We are the sole owner of its integrity. We have all been speaking about, the three pillars of security. They are like confidentiality, integrity, availability. We need to ensure that we all enforce these measures to ensure that no data in motion or data at rest is not jeopardized. The identity is always intact and legitimate. It's bi-directional flow of implementation, I would say. Yeah. In Microsoft 365, you can use information rights management features to apply persistent protection to email and attachment. Right. Firstly, I'm not be talking about what this feature has to offer. Rather, we will be discussing about the security as in whole and concept. That is more of a realistic approach in terms of security. That's your governance and business. All right. I might also walk you through how the portal looks like if the time permits. We might do the demonstration, a real-time incident, or I will surely walk you through what is already deployed for this testing and the webinar. Now, Azure Information Protection, as I mentioned, is a web-based application used for your data governance. It can be accessed through the portal that is the Azure portal.azure.com. That's the first prerequisite. You need to have an active Azure license. At the same time, like I said, it is a part of the Microsoft Information Protection Plan through the EMS. That's your Enterprise Mobility Security. You can game up for the licenses, maybe your E3 or E5, and can leverage the services that can be implemented through Azure Information Protection. Now, let us understand the workforce behind this application. First being classification and labeling, data at rest or data in motion. We need to understand, okay, 1 second. I think so. There is some wrong connectivity with. I can hear only my feedback loud. Chanak, is there a problem by any chance? Guys, I'm sorry about that. Let's continue. Okay, so we were at the stage that we need to discuss about the workforce behind this feature. It has three different stages of processing. First being classification and labeling. At this stage, we as the architect or the solution service provider, we need to identify the integrity of the data. We need to analyze the criticality of the data, right? Before we apply any labels to it. Labels for us to identify what severity policies that we need to enforce to ensure that it is housed properly. All right. The second being the protection. As I just mentioned, once we have identified the data severity, label the data by tagging it as per its severity, we can then do the policy implementation to ensure it is protected. Once we pass out this identification of the data, classification, and creating the policies, we need to measure, right? The only way to measure is to by doing a quick sort of monitoring on that part. The monitoring can be done from the web application itself. Let me walk you through how the portals look like. Just 1 second, guys. To browse the Azure Information Protection Service, firstly, you need to have an active subscription and the required rights for you to manage this portal. Once you are signed into the portal, you go to the Azure Information Blade. This is how the dashboard will look like. You have some predefined labels. As I mentioned previously, the three workflows behind these engines are labels, policies, and monitoring. The monitoring can be done on the dashboard itself. And here are your labels where you create them before you implement or push to the policies. A quick walkthrough that is we're going to perform now, which is already created. Now, labels are the display name to your uh, permissions basis on the identification of the data and its security. The description blade is all about for you to understand what data type is been secure. You can identify them by doing some color codes, permission, allow or deny. So on and so forth, it can be enforced to ensure that your label is created. Once the label is created, we go back to the, I'm sorry, I backed out to the previous page. You go back to the policies and then enforce it. So let me walk you through the global policy. So this will be your policy page. You define the policy. The policy actually is implemented into a hierarchy, be the global that has to be implemented on the domain level itself. So once the policy is ready, you can enforce to your active accounts. That's your Azure AD accounts. And on this window, you can configure the settings that is to be enforced, like sending logging data to AIP, that's your protection analytics, maybe your documents. Should you need to have RMS not to forward the data to any unauthorized access, you can turn off the protection, like if email forward filters, you toggle and the forward button is disabled. Now, back in the old days, we had the conventional method of securing our environment that gradually moved into cloud through a web-based management. And then we realized we need to scale up in security from a conventional method to understand how the data is in flow and what sort of governance is required. So that's when Microsoft M365 licenses will leverage you the Azure Information Protection that can be used to achieve your common goal of securing a data at rest on your file server, on your OneDrive, and in your emails is also at is also required to be protected. Just one second, guys. I'm hearing my feedback loud. I apologize. Just one second, guys. फीडबैक आ रहा है अंदर बैठ नहीं तो Guys, I'm sorry about the interruption. I'm hearing a feedback of my own voice that is creating a problem for my speech. Chanakya Vidhi? Chanakya, are you there?
Yes, Subhash.
Chanakya, I'm hearing my feedback aloud.
I'm sorry.
I'm hearing my feedback when I'm talking out.
Well, your voice does seem to be a bit muffled as of now.
So that's what I'm saying. That is creating a challenge for me to speak out. So if I'm hearing out my voice back and forth, so the order of my speech.
Could you probably try and exit the session and join in again? Maybe it's a technical issue.
Please do. Let me exit out and try it one more time.
Yeah.
अरे मेरे को प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है। हाँ समझते हैं। अभी कर कनेक्ट डिस्कनेक्ट किया था ना। कर कनेक्ट इसीलिए बोला डाउनलोड ऐप कर। ये देख ऐप किया मैंने डाउनलोड। माइक ऑफ करने के बाद भी आवाज आ कैसा आ रहा है वो अभी जितना आप लाउडली बोलोगे उतना आवाज
ऐसे नहीं आना चाहिए ना। सेकेंडली कैसे वो कनेक्ट होते हैं ना, वैसे साउंड में डिस्टर्बेंस है, दोनों का क्लैश। हाँ क्लैश। आप अभी मेरा हेडफोन जाके सुनो तो कुछ तो बोल ही रहे हो। टेक्स्ट तो करना, उसको चैनल में मैसेज तो कर करो।
Ronak, is Subhash going to be joining in?
Yeah, he's joining, but he's having challenges. Could you please hold for a minute more?
Sure, definitely.
Hi, Chanakya. Chanakya, am I audible now?
Yes, Subhash.
Hi, Chad. Yeah, so what
Yes,
went
Subhash, I
wrong the
can hear
first
you.
time? Yeah, so I did not hear the feedback this time. So what went wrong the first time? Was there some technical issue?
Could be, yeah, probably. Yes.
Okay, fine. Let's start again. Thank you. All right, guys, I'm sorry about that. We had a technical glitch. The feedback of my own voice was a kind of a problematic situation for me. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. All right. So we spoke about the Azure Information Protection, the workforce behind that application that actually ensure how you can classify your data basis its severity and label them and create the policy for its implications. So what we saw on the previous slide on the walkthrough of the Azure portal, it is what exactly has been defined here. You can have that AIP do the on-premise scanning onto your environment while the data is in motion or at the rest. That tool is so intelligent that can do the automatic classification for you basis the severity, as you see, the orange being the highly confidential, general and public, that's available for secure. Now, AIP also help the on-premise data, as I mentioned earlier, by deploying an on-premise scanner, the perimeter protection. As I mentioned earlier, we all are adopting the modern workplace from the conventional implementation of the security. Now, the perimeter protection could be deploying your firewalls, ensuring that no intruder or an unwanted access has been done into your environment. Identity device management protection is all about securing your own user identity. Your first name dot last name, that's your logon, is no longer as a UPN, but it has become an identity that everyone is actually behind your credential to uh, gain the access to ensure that they do the spoofing or attack your environment to gain the information out of your own logon. We as the analyst or strategist needs to ensure that we ensure that our environment is fully secure. No security ticket for in writing that can claim that your environment is 100% secure. However, with all the security measures in place, together we can ensure that our security is actually up to the mark as per the compliance and security. Hybrid data, which again is new normal. Our remote users connect to the on-premise information or the infrastructure in the cloud can access the data which is there in the corporate network. Now, we also need to govern the data that is stored in the cloud and in the on-premise infrastructure. From the security perspective, we understand that the remote user will actually have some sort of MDM or the VPN installed on the machine to connect to the on-premise environment or the cloud. But then how it is his or her own machine is that genuine in terms of security, in terms of authenticity. We ensure that the communication established to your corporate network through the VPN is secure. The data in the cloud may be in an unregulated formatted. As I mentioned earlier, if the AIP is not in place, the security of that data can be compromised easily if any unauthorized access is gained. So at times it becomes very difficult to ensure that the data that we have in our network is secured from both the sides, be it on your on-premise or in the cloud. Now, comparing information rights management and Azure AIP, we cannot criticize any feature of the technology. However, we can always overcome the challenges one has to offer with the other. Like with AIP, there are certain limitations when working with IRM. That's particularly related to the SharePoint Online, which clearly states that you cannot use the default or custom protection templates like the protected PDF file are not supported. In terms of role assignment, co-authoring, when more than one person edits a document, at the same time, it is not supported. Like two users who are trying to alter the document at the same time, that is not feasible or achievable. And there are a few flaws, with the IRM implementation. As it also states, Azure Information Protection uses IRM mechanism as well, but primarily works on the client side. Like we spoke earlier, that we could always ensure that we deploy the best of the devices in our environment to ensure that the length and breadth of our security is in place. However, this particular feature works actually on the client side, that is on the user end. Azure Information Protection Client does not require any SharePoint protectors. The labels overview. Now, there are predefined labels on the portal for our own users. However, one size fits all is not the mentality that we always go with when it comes to securing one's environment. A total security measure for one environment could be different than the others. So that's when we decide and design the labels first before we could enforce them onto the data severity. We can categorize how severe that data is and then apply the policies on the data in motion or at the rest. Now, before customizing labels, like I mentioned earlier, we need to have our classification strategy beforehand for the deployment. Azure Information Protection provides a set of default labels and policies. Let me walk you through the portal one more time. All right. So we spoke about that Azure AIP is a subscription-based feature. One has to have the active account to access the AIP, and then we need to have users in the environment. Without that, we just cannot do anything. All right. So either if you have an on-premise environment, you need to have the AD connector to be in place to have your contacts sync. And once the contacts are synced, that's in where your database is ready for implementation of the policies, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory on the left pane. Okay, let me just be there again. The analytics window, that's the homepage of the dashboard, will give you the overview of how the data is governed and the activity that is performed by this implementation. Here we're just not creating the logs today by deploying any labels or implementing any policies, just a quick overview of the blades within the portal. We spoke about labels. Let us go ahead and see the policies. As I mentioned earlier, we can come up with our own policies, ideas, and the strategies that has to be implemented. But back in the old days, we had ACLs, that's your access control list, that could protect your routes, that could protect your network. However, it did not let you control or govern the data when it has passed the application layer. Yeah. So the features that Microsoft has to offer along with EMS, that's the AIP, actually gives you the control to ensure that your data is labeled basis the severity, it is protected, and then you can monitor the behavior of the flow using the logs analytics. Back then, you just earlier when we used to have the firewalls in our environment, we do have it now. However, it has the time that we are talking today about the era of modern workplace. The modern workplace era has adopted the cloud journey, and with that, we have to ensure that we leverage the services that has been offered by Microsoft in terms of compliance, in terms of productivity, in terms of security as well. So let us progress and see the implementation of bulk classification. We spoke about AIP scanning our on-premise environment to classify the data. This is a quick overview of the architect, how it will be functioning along with our on-premise Windows Server classification infrastructure. The AIP scanner is a tool for automatic labeling and classification of files and documents from on-premise file share and SharePoint server. So what it does is basically it actually scans the data at rest, and along with the file classification services, it helps you align your common goals of labeling the data. The scanner is installed on a Windows server with access to the on-premise environment containing the file share and SharePoint libraries to be labeled. Okay. As we progress in our discussion of how we need to leverage the services that are available for usage and application, we talk about now the S-MIME. Basically, S-MIME is nothing but the technology that is again a cloud-based with the help of certificate authentication, ensure that your communication, especially your email, is secured using the asymmetric keys or symmetric keys. We all know what asymmetric key is. Yeah, the same key is used to encrypt the data, and the same key is used to decrypt the data. For example, if I'm the sender of an email, my recipient Bob has to validate me. However, he doesn't have to know the workforce behind the engine, but the S-MIME actually talks about how it has been governed and how the data is flown. Yeah. So with S-MIME, when you have this security in place, it will protect the header of the email through the PKI, that's your public certificate key infrastructure, and ensure that you are the legitimate sender of that email. So if you, it also helps you digitally sign a message with the private key, as I mentioned, that you validate your own identity basis implementation of such S-MIME technology. You become a very good citizen over the web when you ensure that you have such securities in place. We all have come across a situation wherein we send an email that lands up to a junk mailbox. Ever wondered why that may have happened to you? We consider ourselves as a corporate user, knowing the fact that our Active Directory domain is secured. But like I mentioned earlier, you just cannot have 100% claim on that part of aspect. But with all this information in place, you can secure your environment. Now, encrypting your email messages will makes you a legitimate sender, at the same time a good citizen over the web as well, so that your spam filters doesn't mark you as a spammer, and the life of your mail or the life of your communication is good, the sender receives your email rightly as sent by you. Encrypting email messages. This is actually a flow of how the data is been secure. Like I mentioned earlier, we do not need to get into the nitty-gritty of the algorithm which is in place behind the engine. However, when we actually see the slide here, we understand how it has been sent out. Yeah, the sender sends out the messages. It has been encrypted by the algorithm, maybe the MD5, that's your message satisfy, that spits out some code that the recipient has to validate the same. He personally doesn't have to do it. It will be all done by the engine itself. That engine validates the hash by using the public key, that's your asymmetric key, the key which is used for encryption, the same key will be used for decryption. Yeah, the message body is captured, that's your header. Now the recipient is the owner of the public key. So through the public key, the communication is established, a session is generated, the key has to do the validation. User is completely not aware behind the workforce, but is only aware that his email is being sent. So when you have this security measure in place, you can ensure that the three pillars of your security is active and your email is only accessed by the intended recipient and not by a spammer or not by any unwanted authorized person. Now let us talk about introduction to encryption. Now, encryption is not a new topic or not a new technology for our very old industry. However, here we are only talking about the cloud-based solution that the M365 as a subscription or the O365 or the subscription has to offer. Yeah, regardless of the destination, maybe your mail service, maybe your public domain service provider like Outlook, Gmail, or any other service. Now, introduction to Office M365 message encryption. It is all the part of the suite itself. Through the combination of RMS, AIP, and the S-MIME, we ensure that are encrypted. Office 365 message encryption uses built-in certificates to encrypt messages in Office 365 service during the transport of the message. Right? We need to have some sort of governance, right? For governance, we need to have some sort of framework in place. Back in the old days, now as well, and I'm sure it will be followed going forward as well. We are all aware of the OSI model, that is, we learn a lot of things from the model as well to ensure the implementation of the best services. Yeah, but that mode of framework has passed today into cloud. We are adopting the modern workplace services. We are adopting the modern frameworks. The governance still remains the same. However, the data is what we are looking at today to secure. Now let us talk about how Office 365 message encryption works. We already spoke about uh, the flow of an email, you know, what data is captured and how an algorithm is in place to encrypt the header of the email. When a user sends an email message in exchange that matches an encryption rule, the message is sent out with an HTML attachment. It is as good as applying an ACL. However, that ACL is limited to your IP, to your port, maybe to some extent at the socket layer. However, with AIP or with MIP, that's your Microsoft Information Protection, you can control the information at the application layer itself. And then that is achievable through the RMS and the encryption using the SMI. Managed email and productivity. Now the landscape, when I talk about the landscape, I mean the length and breadth of our services in terms of governance has gone once beyond, thought process. Because here the identity, which was a UPN back then, is now so important that a single sign-on feature has given you the access to roam around the entire infrastructure. Your one user account signs you in onto the portal, and there you can leverage boatloads of services. Your identity, your device, your application, your data, it's all the part of one umbrella that's governing your own logon along with all the security measures in place with the Azure Active Directory. That is the pyramid that we all have to secure, come what may the policies or come what may the technology that we enforce to secure our environment as per the compliance. Conditional access, again, a part of the M365 security suite. The name says it's all. Our policy is created basis on condition, which may permit you, which may not permit you, and give you the access to sign on, may deny the permission. But that just not restrict you on the condition of the rules. You can also have the MDM, that's your Microsoft Intune MDM, a part of the suite itself, deployed into your environment to ensure that your own asset, could be your mobile device, could be your laptop, could be your desktop, is controlled by your own corporate policies. A user, we adopted the modern workplace method. Thanks to all this crisis, I would say the IT industry has ensured that it is deployed all the security in place. Remote workers can now be controlled very granularly by using this MDM technologies like Microsoft Intune. You know, your policy compliance verification could be for your device management, your compliance, and advanced device compliance like your antivirus, firewall, patch set, etc. These are all the part of the firewall itself. But we are more interested in securing the seventh layer and beyond, that is your application. Yeah. Now the conditions and the control. The life cycle of a communication is pretty simple. A user connects to a machine and that passes the data onto a switch or a router. You could have n number of security in place to control your devices. But how are you ensuring your data which is in flow is to be controlled? With this conditional access in place, you can have a role-based access model define, deploy, and progressed. When I say progress, I clearly mean, to be in a continuity motion to understand the behavior, understand the pattern of the flow. When a user signs on, if he has given the permission to sign on to any portal or any such services, he will be authorized. If the person has limited access, would get a notification that you do not have the permission to sign on or you do have a reservation on this directory. The best example is the multi-factor authentication. The multi-factor authentication ensure that your user who logs on has to have a dual factor authentication. Could be a text onto your cell phone, could be a call to your own cell phone, could be a biometric impression, could be your RSA token. So deploying all this measure will ensure that your governance is in place. Conditional access plus identity protection actually gives you the complete visibility of the environment. Yeah, it is not only about you logging into a domain, it is about you accessing your own account into a social media platform or any such activity which requires you to sign on to gain some information or access. Yeah, we personally sign into n number of portals these days. How many such portals do we actually remember? We do not. We just have our username and password. We sign on, and that's about it. Windows is caching our credential. But what happens to that credential? Is that safe to be cached? Maybe yes, for your own sake of visibility. However, may not be safe for your organization. The organization has to do the due diligence and be very vigilant in terms of securing your own username and password. Like we spoke about the control on the control plane, when the data is actually in motion, the control plane allows you the function to control the data flow by restricting the permission on the file, restricting or reservation onto your logon access, implementing trust relationship factor through the MDM and whatnot, like the on-premise infrastructure, like your cloud. Yeah, they are two different aspects of governance. On the on-premise, you could have boatloads of services like your ADFS, maybe your FCI that we spoke earlier, classification infrastructure, and whatnot. The goal is to secure your identity by ensuring that we leverage the services of AIP with conditional access along with RMS. Let's proceed on to the next slide. Now, introducing Microsoft Cloud App Security. Well, it is nothing but a layer between your on-premise and the cloud that pass that let you govern the data is passing through, kind of a firewall between your on-premise environment and kind between your cloud. Yeah, the governance is actually all done on the cloud app security. Yeah, here you gain the visibility, you gain control, and once you have the control over your visibility, you can understand the threat detection activity and can ensure that you deploy policies to govern them. Let's do a quick walkthrough of that we just spoke about. Now this admin.microsoft.com is your admin portal wherein you sign in and browse your different security services that is available with your own active licenses. I'm using a test-based sign-on. I am demonstrating using the E5 developer license. This is your security portal that's governs all your measures that are in active state with your subscription, like your DLP, threat management, mail flow, message trace, So depending on the subscription of the license that you procure or you promote, you will have the access to all such security features. Now, the Microsoft Cloud App Security, which is again a cloud-based uh, solution, which actually act as a layer between the on-premise infrastructure and the cloud, gives you the permission to discover and assess the risk that is flowing between back and forth your cloud and the on-premise environment. Once you have identified the risk, you need to mitigate it, right? The mitigation can be only done by controlling the activity that is going to and fro. Protecting your information can be only done once you have the granular visibility. The visibility can be only achieved once you have the security in place. Like I mentioned earlier, you just cannot claim 100% security. However, enforcing all such best measure in your environment will actually create a good defense. Now, cloud discovery, we spoke about, the shadow IT discovery, which is there in the cloud, how you want to actually govern all the app that is published over the web for access. The governance basically can be done by enforcing the policies onto your identity access management on your single sign-on. What sort of permission a user have, and what reservation should be applied onto. you know at the same time, once that is in place, you can assess the risk, ensure the risk has been mitigated by ensuring the policy is in place. With that being said, the ongoing protection analytics. Now, the ongoing protection analytics, which is a part of the discovery, can only be happen at the pre-stage of the implementation of such services. You just cannot go ahead and implement a policy onto a server or onto a account without being defining a concrete strategy to it, because the user needs to adopt the change, and the change can be adopted by defining a best defense in line of strategy. We spoke about identity as the control plane, yeah, which is the underlying part of the technology. The Azure Active Directory, a database which has now become so crucial to protect that all the attackers, forget the attackers, the industry is actually at the part of the progress that the third party application or the interoperability of the other applications are dependent, I would say, on the Azure Active Directory platform. How you want to govern and protect your database by leveraging conditional access, ensuring your multi-factor authentication policies are in place, ensuring your access management is defined rightly basis the user privilege identity. And given the fact that the identity has been now defined, we need to ensure that the protection of the identity is also been covered by enforcing such measures. The on-premises environment can be rightly controlled by implementing the n number of firewalls and n number of IDS devices and the application threat management. However, we also need to ensure, deploying boatloads of uh, firewall appliances will also increase the cost at the same time, will also increase the cost of the maintenance, will also increase the cost of the resources and the governance. You know, let's leverage and scale up on how we have been governing our environment, by subscribing to the EMS suite or by subscribing to the cloud-based application we can just do in blink of an eye, Now, take it for an example. If you were to deploy a firewall into an environment to ensure your data is protected or to ensure your services are in a secured place, you need to do your due diligence first, identify the vendor, then procure, and then move uh, onto the service desk for the procurement, and then the approval process. That will actually take you a good amount of time, maybe a week and a half, 2 or months. However, when you have a cloud-based solution, that's actually readily available for you to use. You just need to have the only one thing in place, that's your active subscription. Once you have the subscription in place, it's all web-based management. You do not need to have all that resources in place, which is actually required, though you can cut down on the resources, but that doesn't mean you lay off such uh, critical resources, because that is also required for everybody, every industry to govern the cloud. We moved on to the model work from home, and then working from home brought to this environment that is called as bring your own device, which has been the part of the industry from good long time, but then the conventional method of access was your users coming to the office and then logging on to your corporate environment and then accessing the resources. However, thanks to all pandemic, like I mentioned earlier, this situation of incorporating bring your own devices environment to the cloud has come up with a lot of challenges and criticality to ensure how we can govern the user machine, which is not the identity of your the corporate. That's when uh, the cloud has offered you solutions like Intune that will govern your asset, as in your application and the data, with your own identity. That's your single sign-on. Now, the entire control plane actually talks about how a user sign in with your own corporate account, and that is how it has been governed by the flow of the method. Now, the identity providers, like I mentioned earlier, we sign on to a lot of social media portal, we sign on to the public environment portal with the new governance that has all been integrated with the Active Directory. So securing all your unwanted access today has become the need of the corporate. Now let us talk about how information protection for cloud apps. We already spoke about this in the previous slide. As I mentioned earlier, that this discussion is not particularly slide by slide or deck by deck. It is the discussion about the security in whole, as in the cloud itself. This visibility can be done on the dashboard itself. With the visibility, you need to understand the risk that is there in your environment, and once you assess the risk, you can classify, as we spoke about, classification of the data basis the severity, and then you can have your security in place. Once this all aspects are in place, you can easily have the monitoring done, and once the monitoring is done, you can have the continuity in flow. This is again a part of the control and the data play. We spoke about risk detection and risk engine. Now, there are several application based rules that one can deploy to ensure your identity is protected. We also need to ensure how this engine works online and offline. Now, real-time detection, like an unfamiliar sign-in and anonymous IP. If your cloud or if your on-premise environment is not secured by any measure, your identity can be compromised. Yeah, I had an interaction with one of the partner, lately, uh, whose identity was compromised by an attacker. A ransomware was deployed into his environment by an anonymous attacker. That partner actually had to pay the money for him to reinstate his identity. Now let's understand the fact, if we do not have this measure, now we are today in the 21st century of the era where we have all this security in place, services to leverage, but still we are old model fashion that we do not want to deploy such good practice. Now the partner, this is not just for the illustration, this is actually a real-time example of a partner who suffered last month by a ransomware attack. He had to pay a number of services fee, the XYZ amount to the attacker to ensure that he has gain over the data which was owned by him earlier. Now, how is he sure that the attacker has not compromised his information? He's just at in the safe hands of God, just praying that his data is actually safe. But that's not the truth. The truth is he could again be compromised by the footprints, by the reconnaissance attack that is there already. The motto of this discussion on this desk is to have the security in place by the measure real time, by the measure of the offline detection, like a malware in case. I just spoke about that person whose environment was compromised by the ransomware attack. Now, had he been ensured his perimeter network by enforcing the firewall rules and by ensuring the CDN policies when it comes to cloud assessment or cloud policies, he would have not been suffered. He suffered business, he suffered technical, he suffered the monetary loss as well. Now, it is not only about the governance, it is also about the pattern of the attack, the pattern of the behavior. You know, we need to understand how this behavior can be monitored. The behavior can be monitored into various ways by using the Cloud App Security Portal itself. That the dashboard will give you the activity logs of a sign-on that can speak about the truth of that sign-on. For an example, John Doe, a user, he signs in to the corporate account. His behavior has been logged by using the analytics. That analytics will actually tell you the truth about his movement. If this detection's not linked to a sign-in, maybe uh, an intelligence by the device itself, then his account could be compromised. There are various aspects to this story, but the bottom line, like I said, the goal is to ensure uh, that you have your identity secured by all possible manner. We spoke about earlier that the Active Directory is the root or the backbone of the database uh, that has been available along with our several database fashion. This is the one database that is vendor neutral nowadays, I would say, because a lot of the other third-party applications are integrated with this Active Directory. So day by day, the count is rising. You see the stat that is proposed on the deck now has passed more than 1.4 million, and there are 100 plus single sign-on apps created nowadays that we need to protect. Now, the thing from a bird's eye view, from a 50,000-foot view, governing all this uh, threats in today's environment has become a challenge, but this challenge has been overcome with all these measures in place. Now let's just talk about risk with privilege access. Privilege access are nothing but an access given to a user uh, role more than what he's been doing. There are number of permission given to an admin. Thus, we have n number of built-in administrator into the Active Directory, and there are n number of built-in roles assigned to an account itself. With higher number of privileges, higher number of risks are involved. We are almost there, but let's not forget talking about the DLP. That's your data loss prevention policy, which is also a part of the suite to ensure that your data is protected and available with integrity, which means it's not been compromised. Various levels of doing so. In Office 365, you can use a DLP policy to identify, monitor, protect sensitive information. You can create a DLP policy in Office 365 that recognize the properties that have been applied to documents by Windows Server. That's your typical on-prem environment. Yeah. Lastly, we adopted the modern workplace. We adopted the modern era of accessibility. Let us also talk about the WVD that is generally worldwide available along with your uh, licenses, which delivers you. Well, basically, let me just talk about the WVD first. It is again a cloud-based hosted service that is offered by Microsoft in comparison to your regular RDS server. That's your terminal services. But the beauty about this WVD is actually leveraging the client-based algorithm, client-based services. You can have this deployed into your environment seamlessly integrated with your single sign-on. You do not have to buy a typical server to host your virtualization these days. You can have this service incorporated with your license. All you need to have is few procurement done along with your licenses and deploy them in just a blink of eye. This is actually the virtualization that is trending along with the conventional virtualization like your VMware, like your Citrix. But the best part it is blended with both the benefits of your terminal servers and your virtualization. Now, the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session is scalable. When I say multi-session, you actually give the privileges of the concurrent users to access that session, maybe onto a remote user or publish the app at the same time onto the cloud for the availability. You do not need to actually create a terminal, uh, I mean, a terminal connection between the broker. You simply publish the app onto the cloud using the licenses and let your user access the files, the folders, the session itself. It's like, connecting to your corporate environment through a secured measure from anywhere, anytime, with any device. Security in cloud is a blended portfolio altogether that Microsoft has offered. The convergence of the Microsoft ecosystem, it's pretty realistic. It is a very layered approach and very simple in terms of usability. The application is pretty simple. When I say application, I do not mean the web-based application, I mean the implementation of the policies. We spoke about conditional access, we spoke about multi-factor authentication, we spoke about role-based access control, which is a part of the suite. Now, the beauty of the compliance here, you get best of everything. It is blended with M365, the compliance in place with the Azure, and what you get is a perfect tailored made solution wherein your environment is hosted publicly for availability. At the same time, it is also protected with all these measures. Many customers are already eligible for Windows Virtual Desktop. This deck particularly talks about how you can subscribe for this virtualization service. Maybe if you have M365 Business or the licenses for your E3, the student, and the VDA, that's your virtual desktop environment assessment per user. The server and the client base model is the entire concept that the WVD has come along with all the features that M365 has to offer. Now, the Microsoft, uh, along with its global reach, you know, when we talk about the Microsoft Global Network, we talk about how it is publicly made available to the entire audience. With the 54 regions in place, you have the services available. But let us also understand, before we actually target the audience across the region, we also need to understand whether that solution is available for that particular region, and that can be only done by understanding the nitty-gritty of the availability. The connectivity between this data center is done seamlessly through the express route. You have 160 edge solutions working with a lot of ISPs, ensuring all your deployment, all the data governance is compliant with the industry standard with the topmost throughput using the fiber optic channels. We have adopted the modern workplace, but then along with the modern workplace adoption, the industry is still at the pace of having the authentication done based on the password. Here we let us talk about a few other ways where you can authenticate yourself, be it the hardware, be it the software, or be the blend of the both. Yeah, when I say blend of the both, you could have uh, the traditional method of sign-on, that's your username and your password, that's your UPN, authenticated, along with the MFA, that's your multi-factor authentication. At the same time, you can have this RSA token. Back in the old days, I used to see people roaming along with the RSA tokens in their neck. I used to sometimes, figure out why are these keys, with them all this time. But that key, along with your sign-on, actually validates your authentication, and that's how you have now password-free access to your identity. Well, uh, we have almost come to the end. When I say almost, I mean we had a disruption in the middle of the session, but I thank you to all my audience who was pretty cooperative when we had that blunder. Uh, Let me just, I wouldn't take much of your time, maybe a couple of minutes to walk you through the portal that is available along with the subscription. May not be the entire configuration of the policy, but a quick overview how the dashboard looks like. We spoke about the AIP already. So this is you can gain access through your Azure portal. The M365 portal bases your license entitlement. You get to migrate, or rather leverage the services that your license has to offer. Now this is the entire security suite. It talks about the DLP implementation, the dashboard gives you the real-time insights about the activity that has been logged by the user behavior, and that's pretty much about it. Yeah, we can always welcome your feedback should you want to gain more knowledge about the implementation of such services, or having a quick demonstration of what we just spoke about. That's your AIP, or your implementation of the S-MIME, or the enforcing the DLP in your environment. All your feedback will be welcome. You can certainly ask for the questions that is coming to your mind, or if you have any thoughts associated with this session, all are welcome now. Chanakya, back to you. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer them all right now. All right, guys, it seems to me that we are at the end of the closure of the session today. I did not see further questions coming to me for my addresses. I think we are good to conclude. I thank you all for your patience. I thank you all for coming in today for a quick discussion about the modern information protection offerings by Microsoft itself. And I apologize about the trouble that we had earlier at the beginning of the session. Guys, I sign off now. Thank you for your time and patience, and have a good day.